back, everybody, to the newest episode of the PenPodcast.com. I'm your host, Matthew Harms, founder of Pen for Hire, where we offer premier ghostwriting and author coaching services. Also, the creators of the Pen Podcast, where we sit with authors, writers, writing industry professionals, subject matter experts, and all-around interesting people. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by literary agent Linda Camacho. How are you today, Linda?
I'm fine. Thank you. This is great. Glad to be here.
Very much. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
Where are you joining us from?
Queens. Yeah, Queens, New York. Yeah.
You're right over the bridge from me.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize you were in New York. That's right.
Yeah, I'm in Yonkers.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Born and raised in the Bronx. So with no traffic, I could probably get to you in 20 minutes. But considering this is New York, it's more like an hour.
That's true. Yeah. And I was born in the Bronx too. I was raised there until, my gosh, I think I was 20 when I left for college. And then, I've been living around New York, various parts of it. Yeah.
Love it. Small world. Believe it or not, very rarely get New Yorkers on the podcast. Right.
I always forget for some reason that there are not that many of us, interestingly. I really do forget. I'm like, oh, right. Okay. I guess I forget everyone wants to be here, comes to at least visit for a while.
That is the nice thing. Yes. The only thing I still like about New York is I've met more than half my clients, even though none of them are based in New York. And there's always opportunity to meet the rest because everyone comes to New York at some point or another.
Exactly. Yes.
How long have you been in the literary world?
About 18 years so far. Yes. Almost 20 years.
How'd you start out?
I started out doing reprint, what they called reprint production at Penguin, before it was Penguin Random House. And it was very back end. I wanted to be front end editorial, which is what most people think of when they think of publishing. But I took whatever job I could get. And it was such a learning experience because I didn't realize at the time that that's where most of the money is made, through the backlist.
Really? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Like you definitely, of course, front list will put, you have your massive successes, right? You have your Stephen Kings and all those people. But a majority of the sales will always be backlist. That is what basically floats the business. Absolutely. And then you have, of course, the massive successes on the front list that will float the more mid-list author or the people they want to take a chance on. But people will usually think of the sexy front list, right? The stuff that's coming out, and anything a year out is considered backlist. So that is the crux of publishing, backlist.
Interesting. I guess that makes a lot of sense because you're always going to have more backlist than you're going to have upcoming new releases, especially upcoming new releases that are going to be wildly successful, like Stephen King's next book.
Exactly. And even if you're, whatever level you are as an author, we always say front list sells backlist, right? That's what we say. Okay, even if, let's say your book didn't do as well as your publisher you wanted, keep going. And if you can continue publishing, it's that list that will always come back, because if that person discovers you, they'll ideally fall in love with your book and go, okay, I want to read everything by this person. So backlist will always be premier.
That is such a great point, because I'm in a lot of different author groups and marketing groups, and even in the independent world, that's really where it's very hard to make a living as an author off of book sales, right? I think we all know that. Yeah. But when you have 4, 5, 6, 7 books in your backlist, just like you said, if someone finds your one, you only made maybe $4, but now if they buy the other 7, you're up to a whopping $28.
Exactly. Yeah, people forget. It's easy to forget. It really is.
You know what? We live so much in the now and the what's new, and we tend to forget what happened yesterday.
Exactly. And even publishers sometimes forget that, right? I think, publishers will, your book is out and then they market it for so long. They're like, okay, done. But if you start to go up in sales, then they'll remember, oh, backlist. And they do. Publishers really do try to exploit, and that's, in a good way, the backlist as much as possible. But, if something happens with your front list title that gives you that blip, then they go, oh, let's really push that backlist, get those books out there.
Got it. So you said something earlier about making the publisher possibly take a chance on a newer author. From your experience, what drives that? I think that's a pressing question on every new author, current author who aspires to get a traditional publishing contract. What is that thing? If you could pin it down to what could someone do to say, hey, I'm that person, take that chance on me?
Oh man, I really wish I knew the exact thing. I know whenever I talk, I wish there were like a formula, because people ask me that all the time too, right? Sometimes they'll ask me that even if I pass on a manuscript, and I see a lot of really great stuff come my way, right? I think it really is. I mean, yes, people will look at numbers, right? If you're not a debut, they definitely will look at your backlist, but I've definitely sold people, their sophomore book, and they haven't done well previously, but the editor fell in love and was able to make a case for it. So you really need someone to subjectively fall in love with your work. And that's really hard to pinpoint. They always want something fresh. They always say, when I talk to editors, I want something unique. I want a special voice. But what that is, man, if I knew, I would sell every single book on my list. And that's just not realistic.
It sounds like it's one of those things that you know it when you see it, but you
Yeah.
can't explain it.
Yeah. No, it's that special something, right? It's like when you read a book, whether, let's say it's a New York Times bestselling book, and sometimes you go, how did that book get on the list? Or how did, you might, it's just not resonating, versus a book that no one really seems to pay attention to, but you're like, why isn't everybody reading this amazing book? It's just something that sings to you.
It's funny you mentioned New York Times best-selling list, because sometimes even that I feel is subjective to somebody's attachment to something. The example I'll give, and I won't name the authors, but I usually, only time I get to read is when I'm on vacation. Otherwise I listen to audiobooks, but I can't listen to fiction audiobooks. I have to read them in paperback, and I always read them on vacation. So went away last August, brought 2 books. Both were best-selling authors.
Yeah.
The first one I finished in 2 days. The second one I am still reading.
Interesting. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the second one has been a Netflix series now. Like, it's wildly successful.
Mm-hmm.
I just can, and it's in my favorite genre of fantasy. I just can't get into it, but I refuse to stop reading it because I bought it and I've invested this much time in it.
Right. Yeah. The whole New York Times thing, I always tell clients, it really is an editorial list. They're not really tied to sales. I mean, people have sort of cracked the formula, that, or they try to figure out what that is, right? If you sell so many copies at certain Barnes and Nobles, we don't know which ones, you could make the list conceivably, which some people have bought. If they have money to do so, they'll buy a bunch of their books if they figure it out, but it really isn't tied to sales. It really is an editorial process as well.
Interesting. I know, was it a year or so ago, there was someone who shall remain nameless, but rather well-known last name, who their organization bought, I think, thousands of copies of the book.
Yes.
Which is what propelled it to the list. But
absolutely,
what does that really say? That's one person who made one big purchasing decision.
Exactly. Yeah. And that, I mean, if someone figures it out, they absolutely can do that. That's why I always tell clients, look, if you make the New York Times bestseller list, we will be really excited. It's wonderful, but understand what it means. It doesn't. I have many clients who've outsold quite a few people on that New York Times bestseller list who've never made the New York Times bestseller list. Factually speaking, they just haven't hit whatever that algorithm is.
Are you seeing an increase in the amount of companies that are out there offering you that hack of, we can get you on the list?
I've seen a few of those. I'm curious to see I haven't seen it necessarily an increase, but there are plenty of those who do it, that they go, we've cracked the code. And I'm already forgetting the name of that woman who did. Oh man, there was one woman that she made the New York Times bestseller list #1. She knocked Angie Thomas, who wrote the Hate U Give, off the list. And she had been on that list for couple of years at that point. And someone thought, this is fishy. What is this random? And again, you definitely have people who will get on the list. Publishers can generally make it happen if they really, really, and I used to work in marketing, when they really want a book to hit a list, it's amazing to see the forces at work. They can at least make it hit once, and then it falls off and you'll never see it again. But that particular instance, and of course I've blanked on the name, they found out that she had figured out the code, and she had her people buy copies strategically at specific Barnes and Noble stores. And then she managed to be #1 on the list for a week. before I think they stripped her of that title actually, but yeah, when they realized, nope, can't do that. But, technically she did figure out how to do it.
Right. And you only have to have it once, right?
You're always a New York Times bestselling author if you hit it once.
That's what people do with Amazon too, because Amazon's a lot easier to manipulate. There's programs out there, but you screen grab that badge and it doesn't matter if you lose it the next day, you got it.
Exactly. And that's the thing too. I mean, there are going to be some people who never hit any of the best-selling lists, and there's so many out there, but they can be so successful and do really well and never have had a list. And that's why I'm always wary when someone's like, I'm a bestseller. I'm like, what list are we talking about? Exactly. What list are we meaning? That you hit it on Amazon through an ebook? And again, that's part of it. But I think when they pitch themselves, they'll, kind of tweak certain things.
Right. And in what category on Amazon did you hit it in? Because if you put it in 1860s basket weaving, where you only need to sell 4 books.
Right. Yeah. And again, it's always a nice thing to have, consider bonus points to have a best-selling book. I love that, but really I always urge writers to just focus on the writing, do the best you can. Don't worry about that stuff, because you can be successful without ever hitting a bestseller list.
Love it. That's definitely a huge takeaway for everyone that's listening. I think too many times people think that if you're not a bestseller, you're not good.
Right. Right.
Back to your earlier point of how much great stuff you pass on. Just because someone doesn't get their book picked up by a publisher doesn't mean they're not a good writer.
Right. Yes. So many yeses on that. Because again, I get, even when I pass, I'll say something like, unless there's something that I find that's like a craft thing, most things really aren't craft based for me. It's really instinctive. So I'll say this is my gut instinct. And sometimes they'll go, but what's your gut telling you? And I feel really bad because I understand why they're asking. But really, it just didn't excite me in that way. And it can be a genre that I love. It can have all of the right elements, but for me, it maybe didn't feel fresh. It didn't feel something. And I can't really quite put my finger on it.
I think, in that context, it's hard to explain what you're saying, but if anyone can relate to their own life, right? Like you have an experience, a movie, a restaurant, where there's nothing inherently bad about the experience, but it's just not super memorable.
Right. Yeah. And I attended an MFA program, and I get a lot of MFA people. And again, I always tell people I loved getting an MFA, but it's a luxury degree. You don't need an MFA. But I do find that, again, not all MFA people, but it's really hard to get through to them to say, hey, this thesis that you queried me with, beautifully written. I can see someone picking this up, but it still doesn't work for me. And even when you write, and I hate saying it, it's like, even when you write something that's technically flawless, it doesn't mean that someone's going to take it on. Because even when I'm thinking of what I want to take on, even when I really enjoy it, a big question I ask myself is, do I see myself reading this at least 50 more times? And if the answer is, I don't know, then that's a no.
Yeah,
That's
and
it.
The technical aspect that you mentioned, I mean, at least for me, it's almost not even it's a non-starter, because publishers have editors. Yes, I'm not saying that it's okay to send in a complete word vomit with punctuation and grammar and all that, but it doesn't need to be flawless, because flawless doesn't mean it's interesting. Flawless doesn't mean it's riveting. A good editor can make a bad writer good and a good writer great.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and I get those all the time with people. Again, it's subjective. The people that I represent, and I pitch their work, and I'll still get an editor going, I loved it. It's so great, but I can't take this on. Right. So it's really tough. It's tough even on our side as well.
Is there a top reason when someone says, I love it, but I can't take it on? What's generally the top reason for that?
Sometimes if the person is not a debut, it could be past sales, but again, it's a whole board of people, right? That it does vary, because smaller publishers will have fewer hoops to jump through bureaucracy, just by the nature of the size of it. But if you're looking at a whole acquisitions team, and you're sitting at a meeting, you're an editor trying to convey how much you love a book to the whole like sales and marketing and publicity, you have to really make a solid case. And if someone just doesn't see it, they just don't. And a lot of the reason is they want to hear, this is like if you're writing fantasy, this is like the stuff that's out there, because they don't want to hear it's never been done before. It scares the heck out of them. But it cannot be exactly what's been done before. That's the tricky thing. How do you balance it? So it's like the stuff that's out there, but it's unique for XYZ reasons, right? So even when you're writing your book and you're going, oh my God, I love it, it's the best thing out there. But look at the marketing question later. I would say, and you have to love what you're writing, do all that, but you really have to be able to define, yeah, it's like this, but how is it different? Otherwise, they're going to ask, why are we publishing it? We published that before. But yeah, a lot of that is the market differential, which is, I do tell people, pretty arbitrary.
So I kind of,
everything's arbitrary. Man, if you watch the Penguin Random House Supreme Court thing, man, when they were trying to stop the potential merger with Simon Schuster and Penguin Random House, a lot of publishing heads, they just went, we don't know what makes a bestseller. We're not sure. We hope for the best.
writing is one of those things where there's almost no right or wrong way to do it.
Yeah.
I used to say the only thing you need is like, you need to have punctuation, you need to have but
Right.
there was an author recently, I forget who it was, but they like put out this book with hardly any punctuation at all. Like
Wow.
it was
Yeah.
a new style of writing and it got picked up.
Wow. See, you never know. Like I've passed on things where I go, I could see someone like snatching this up easily. I've passed on things that have offers come in, like an author says, Random House wants to publish my book. Could you represent me? But if I don't get excited, I'll go, not for me, maybe someone else to advocate for it. But I also see plenty of things that I'm like, again, it's subjective. I'm like, no, it's just no. And then they go on and be bestsellers. I mean, that's kind of the beauty and the
horror.
The horror of it. Yeah. Yeah. Because I've been wrong and I know I will be wrong in the future. Absolutely. No question.
So you were starting to touch on something that I think is really important, sort of question I love to ask literary agents. What for you in a query letter is like something that you want to see? And then what's something that you just cringe when you see it in a query letter?
Oh yeah. Okay. Oh, there are a few things, but okay, I'm going to start with the stuff I don't love to see, or the cringy thing. Okay, sometimes people will write in the voice of their character, as if it's the perspective of the character. Like, I'm going to say, like, the character is Snoopy, or for some reason, and they're writing it as if they're from that perspective. It just doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for many agents. Whenever I talk to a lot of agents, they'll usually write it off as corny. Now, you might find someone who adores it, but it's just really hard for some reason. I don't know. It doesn't work. I also, if we're going to throw in another one, writers will sometimes be one of two sides, where they're like, this is going to be your next bestseller and you're a fool if you don't take this on. Or they'll go, this is my first book, so I hope it's good, right? You want to sell, again, another balance, right? How do you sell it as this thing that you love, you've worked hard on, without being kind of douchey and saying you're a fool for saying no to this, right?
Right. I never understood the school of thought of telling the industry professional who's been doing their job for 10, 15, 30 years that, hey, you're an idiot if you don't publish my book.
Right.
Because, no, they're like, I don't even want to read the rest of your letter. You think I'm an idiot.
Right. Because sometimes they'll even slam the whole genre they're writing. If it's, let's say, adult romance, they'll go, all adult romances are terrible and horrible, but mine is great, right? That happens too. And I'll just go, you don't respect the genre. How? Like, you could have an amazing book, but I'm not interested.
And what made you even want to write in that genre if you think the whole thing is trash?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. But in terms of the things I like, I always tell people with query letters, because I would say it's a bummer to write. I completely empathize with anybody who has to write a query letter. Such a job.
It's harder than writing the book.
It is, right? You're distilling not even the whole book, but I always tell people like the first 30 to 50 pages somehow into this description. Don't give away the ending, of course, which some people do. But the stuff that I like is when, and again, it's a hard balance, when they're describing the book and they somehow infuse the voice, not of necessarily of the character, like that first person POV, but like if it has to kind of seep in some way. So if they're writing this beautiful literary adult fiction piece, then it reads kind of like that, beautiful and flows, right? If someone tells me it's a comical middle grade, I want to see that it's funny without you ever saying that it's a funny story, right? How do you sort of infuse just a little bit of that tone that I could see it apply to your work? That's helpful. But I will also say, most of my clients have written good queries. There are very few that have written amazing queries. So I think as long as you have done your research and you know, okay, this is what it looks like, you do the best you can, and it doesn't sound completely generic, like, oh, I've read this if it's a fantasy, I've read this a billion times before. If it doesn't sound completely generic, most of us will at least read your pages, generally, because some people just aren't good at it, even for all the trying. They're just, meh. I notice an amazing query letter, pretty rare. And I also notice the really terrible, bad query letters. And that's people who just never bothered to read what a query letter is. They're like, oh, here's my pitch. And it's not a query letter,
Got it.
Yeah.
You said read pages. So how often when you get a query letter, do you request a sample of the writing?
Over time, it's gotten less because my list has gotten fuller. So the more established the agent, and I wish I don't know the stats of it, but I don't know stats. I don't do it as often as I would like, but oh man, maybe 30% if I made a number. My first couple of years, it was almost everything, just because you go, this could be something. And even for me, I've had to learn over time, and I still question this. I try to trust my taste because I can only know what I like. And I hope that and I keep an eye on the market, of course, that's the whole point of it. But there have been things that I've taken on that I tell the potential client, this is going to be a really hard sell, and I'll be upfront about it. And if they want to go forward with me and it feels like the right fit, we try it. But I'll always be upfront. If it's really going to be hard, I do occasionally take on things where I go, I don't know, but I love this so much that if they're willing to try, I'm willing to try.
Got it. And how many pages do you generally request when something strikes you?
I'll usually just request the full. So for me, when I'm open to queries, it doesn't mean I read the full. That's the thing, right? So I will usually get about the first 2,000 words with the query, 2,000 words. And if I didn't read more, I'll just say, okay, just send me the full, because it helps to know the shape of the story when I make the decision. And after a point, I just read until I don't want to read anymore. And that can be maybe to page 50. Maybe it was only 3 pages after the initial sample. So yeah, that happens too.
Have you ever decided to take a project that you didn't make it to the end? Where maybe you read 40, 50 pages and you just knew it was it?
Yes, I've done it though for someone who's been published before.
Okay.
Right, that helps. Now, if they've been published before, sometimes they'll query with a sample, like instead of the full manuscript. I mean, I always advise, if you've had an agent previously and you've been published before, really, it helps to make a better decision if you have the full manuscript. But maybe once or twice I've made that offer because I fell head over heels in love with their writing. They've been published before, so I know they can finish a book and they can generally meet deadlines. But not often. That's pretty rare. And that's for fiction, right? So nonfiction obviously is a different matter. I don't really do much of that at all, but that's a proposal with sample pages. So if they have the right platform, because platform is a platinum in nonfiction, unless when I talk to editors, you can get away from platform only if the idea is so unique and so relevant and it just hits on it's like lightning striking in that bottle. They could make an exception, but platform is going to be king there.
Got it. Have you I would imagine you had to, but I'm still going to ask.
Yeah.
Anyone query you where they didn't even finish the book yet?
Yes, absolutely. And for fiction, you really need to finish the book, especially if you're a debut, right? Even if you're someone who's been published before, and unless you've done really well, and they can kind of get around that, just assume you want to finish the book, especially if you're branching into a new genre. So yeah, but if you're a debut, I've definitely gotten people who just didn't, they didn't know. And I just go, oh no, if I've requested the full and they're like, oh, I haven't finished it yet. I'll go, okay, no, finish the book. And then not just finish it, you have to go through the process of editing and all of that. But I also had a person once, and she was super sweet and lovely. She was part of a grad school program. And I think, what was I doing? I think she was doing like pitch sessions through the program. And I said, hey, I said, I'll request pages. This looks really good. And she's like, oh, I didn't finish yet. That was an exception. I was like, okay, when you're finished, send it to me. And then she kept sending, I think she was so excited. She kept sending me updates. She's like, Linda, I'm halfway through. Linda, I'm almost. And the thing is, I just said, no, that's good, but don't send me the thing as soon as you're finished. That's first draft, right? And what does she do anyway? The second she said immediate, and I knew, well, by looking at it also, that was first draft, but on a Friday, she said, Linda, I finished it. And then I got it that Saturday. So maybe she proofread it. I don't know what she did. And so I always say too, that if an editor or an agent expresses interest, editors sometimes will have a time frame because if they're open to queries, that I understand. But for agents, take as much time as you need, right? So don't rush it, because sometimes they'll come back and they'll go, hey, I revised this thing. Do you want to look at it again? And usually it's a no, not unless it's been revised so much that it's a brand new book. I'm not usually interested in seeing it. And if I'm interested in seeing it, it's pretty rare that I give an R&R, which is a revise and resubmit. Like if I'm like, this is really good, it's almost there, I might say, I noticed XYZ if you want to revise, because it gives me a sense too, are they good at revising? But that's pretty rare too. So don't assume you'll get an R&R even. Just assume it's a one-shot deal, unless the agent goes, fix it, I want to see it. Yeah. Now, again, even saying that, that doesn't mean that if I pass on this one project, that I'm passing on all of your projects, right? So maybe that next book, I've had this happen with a graphic novel person that I represent. She queried me with, it's like a fantasy, and it was really good. It just didn't feel like it was there yet. And then she later queried me with something else, and that's the thing I took on. So you never know sometimes. Just don't try to re-query me with the same thing unless I go, oh yeah, send it back.
Got it. We're just about at time, but I want to end with one question. We might have covered this in many different ways, but if you could, in one sentence,
oh gosh, okay,
or one or two sentences, the best advice you could give to anyone who is about to start querying an agent, what do you wish every person that came across your desk knew?
That I say this a lot to people. Agents, there's definitely a power thing, especially in the beginning, a power dynamic. But I always remind people the power dynamic will always switch when we fall in love with your book, and you have more power than you realize. Just remember that we're book nerds. This is the only place in life that I have any sort of quote unquote authority. And that, if I'm at a conference, I guess I'm popular, but I'm just a person who loves to sit in a room and read whenever, she has the time to do it. So just know that, we want to connect with you. We need you. So don't be afraid of us. And when you're looking for someone, I guess this is like two pieces of advice. Look for someone that you really feel you'll connect with, right? When you're talking to them down the line, if you don't feel like even if they represent Stephen King or whoever, if you don't feel like you can talk to the person, or that they're not enthused about your book and just isn't going to work, it's okay to keep talking to other people. Like, it's okay. Your career is not going to not go anywhere if you don't sign with so-and-so agent. You might be someone else who's just that perfect fit.
I love it. That is fantastic advice. And I know from your website, you're closed for queries at the moment, but if anyone was looking to find out more about what you do, anything like that, where can people find you?
Sure. So you can check out my website, lindacamacho.com, LINDACA. macho.com. It'll announce when I'm open for queries, and I'm doing, opening to select creativity coaching, because I think with writers, the editorial stuff is important, no question, but a lot of it is, how do you keep doing this thing that you love to do? How do you stick it out? Because most people quit. It's a roller coaster ride, even for publishers, agents. Every day we go, we're still here, right? We're still here. And we have to remind ourselves of why we're doing this thing. And a lot of it is passion. That's the thing. Not only passion, but you have to sometimes remind yourself, why am I here? And I try to remind people of that.
More amazing advice.
Yeah.
So for everyone that's been tuning in or listening to the replay of this, definitely head over to Linda's website, lindacamacho.com. We always appreciate supporting our guests. I know I have learned a ton from here. I've got notes of questions I didn't even ask, so I'm going to put them into practice in my own life, so that I am not one of those people that Linda is on a podcast talking about being that cringe-worthy query letter. Hopefully we all walked away with something that we can elevate our game and stand out in a better light next time we reach out to an agent. Linda, I really appreciate you taking the time today. This was informative and entertaining, and I had a blast.
Yeah, same here. Thank you for inviting me.
You are very welcome.